welcome back to the Redshirt Sophomore. We never sit out, except sometimes. But we're here. We're going to talk toughest schedules in college football. If you were with us last week, we talked some of the easiest schedules in college football by conference, right? Because it's all relative. We're not just going to pummel particular conferences right now and just put some of these top-end conferences at the top of this list. No, we're going to take a team from every single conference. Shout out Notre Dame. You're not going to be on this because you don't have a conference. Hashtag join the conference. So we're going to see what you guys think. CD and I had like a pretty decently long debate about all of these. And we were talking about these for like over a half hour. So like we both came together with our lists and we ended up coming to a conclusion on all of these. So we got some teams for you, maybe some surprises for you guys as well. If you guys didn't see a team that you had in mind on this list, then let us know. You know, your criteria might be a little bit different than ours, but all we're going to say is I think we're right. So, CD, how we feeling?
Yeah, doing good. Excited to be back here. Obviously, talking toughest schedules. We had done our easiest schedule, so make sure to check that out when you do get a chance. After watching this video, like, subscribe, share, all that good kind of stuff helps our channel grow, helps more people catch our content, and we do a good job. We think we work very hard, making sure it's quality stuff for you guys. But excited to get into this. This gives us a chance because we do pride ourselves on being a national college football show, meaning we talk about every single conference, not just the ones that are playoff contenders, not the ones that have the big TV rights deal, not the ones that have all the draft picks and recruiting picks. While those are so important, obviously, we like to see the full 360-degree view of college football. So these are some of my favorite episodes where we really get to talk about each conference.
Also, disclaimer, the Pac-12 is not in this. You will be, maybe in future years, all right? But we're just going to talk about 9 conferences today, which includes, I think, 130 teams, I think, 129, whatever it is. But let's just get into it. We'll start off with the SEC. There's a lot of good schedules in the SEC. I think this one's fairly obvious. I think we talked about Kentucky and Arkansas being pretty decently hard schedules in their own right. And there's some other ones in there as well. Florida.
Yeah.
Right?
Again.
Florida.
Here we are again.
Last year, it was the toughest schedule in the country. This might be the toughest schedule in the country. I would definitely put it against these other schedules that we're going to talk about today in these other conferences. But yeah, this has to be one of, if not the hardest schedule in college football for a variety of reasons. Your out of conference and your in conference opponents are particularly tough.
Without a doubt. I think that's what we look for is the overall quality. That's what separated them, I thought, in my opinion. Not only do you have your Georgias and your Tennessees at Ole Miss, at LSU, at Texas A&M, some of the tougher, more talented teams in the SEC, but you also do throw in a couple of in-state rivals at Miami who whomped you last year in the Swamp. Obviously, who knows about Florida State this year? We're excited to talk more about them and what we think their chances are of competing because they also have a pretty tough schedule as well later on in the summer. And then for good measure, Alex Golesh and South Florida, one of the more talented teams in, the AAC there. So that's no pushover either. I'm sure you'll be plenty, comfortable favorites, but that don't make it easy, especially when you are going 12 games, an 8-game SEC schedule. That's pretty tough. Your only, easy-ish game like we're talking about is Mississippi State and at Kentucky. But even those, are potentially the end of or after a couple of really tough games. And, in the SEC, you can get caught by just about anybody, especially if you don't have the depth, and injury luck to combat it. So poor Florida, man. Billy Napier, we talked about that a lot last offseason about it being a pretty important season and how the schedule did not help his favor at all, and especially with what they were trying to build there and the momentum he was gaining on the recruiting trail. And he got through, he did his thing. They overperformed last year and they're looking to do the same this year as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be some knuckle draggers in the comments or just who watch this that are thinking in their head like, oh my gosh, Florida. Play a real team. What are you doing playing LIU week 1? Oh my gosh, what a garbage SEC schedule, whatever. See, let's do a little experiment right here. All right, I want you to do some math, okay? I'm going to add up two numbers, okay? I'm going to tell you to add up the numbers 0. What's 0 plus 8, CD?
8.
Cool. Now, what's 3 plus 3?
6.
Cool. So would you say that a 0 and an 8, all right, happens to be more than just a 3 and a 3?
Without a doubt, yeah.
I hope I don't have to explain much further to our audience that this may describe some of these schedules that we're talking about today when you're talking about high quality opponents. Sure, there are some tune-up games and pay-to-win games that you're going to see on some of these schedules today, but that's not completely indicative of the true nature and the true depth and toughness of these schedules. Like you said, I mean, Florida. You already mentioned all the teams, so I'm not going to name them too, but you got to go on the road to A&M. Like, that's a winnable game for you. You got spanked at home last year, right? Playing against them. You got to go on the road there. LSU, that's a winnable game, but you got to go on the road, right? So it's not even just like, oh my gosh, who you're playing, right? But fortunately, look, some of those easier games, like the Mississippi States, having that game at home, it's almost a waste because you believe that you're good enough to beat them on the road regardless. You would have liked to have that A&M game at home. Of course, the SEC schedules flip-flop from last year to this year, so didn't really control that going into this year. But point being, there are things even beyond Ole Miss on the road. There are things even beyond, right? Just the legitimacy of these opponents and they're out of conference. Schedule dynamic too does not necessarily look too pleasing to me either.
We saw Florida get pretty banged up last year, and part of that was because their schedule was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. And yeah, obviously you're also talking about like those people that come in and say Long Island University, and getting mad at the SEC for playing cupcakes, getting mad at them for playing an 8-game schedule. But here's the reality. Like, you ask any single coach to trade their schedule with this schedule here, I couldn't find a single one in college football. I'd be damned if you would find one for me that would trade with Florida. This is ridiculous, and it is brutal.
Yeah, but I want to hear from you. Like, I thought Kentucky and Arkansas were particularly tough schedules. I thought that they have an argument. Like, you look at some of the opponents that they have, like Arkansas, they got to play Memphis and they got to play Notre Dame in their out of conference. Not to mention some tough in-conference opponents as well. That's a pretty interesting schedule as well. Kentucky's interesting because they don't get to play themselves, right? But yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys on your thoughts on what are some of the toughest schedules in the SEC. But we happen to think the toughest is in Gainesville. Let's head over to the Big Ten. CD and I kind of had a little bit of a debate about this. We each made a top however many. He thought that far and away it was Wisconsin. Wisconsin was my number 2, and I do think that I see the argument for Wisconsin being the toughest schedule in the Big Ten. I mean, look, it's a pretty brutal schedule. CD mentioned to me off air. Do you want to tell him what you told me off air in terms of what you're predicting their schedule to look like after week 4?
Yeah, if you talk to me right now, I would not pick them to win a single game after week 4. And I think they will probably be better than last year. Yeah, that's what's ridiculous. And poor Luke Fickell, I say with a smile on my face, poor Luke Fickell is, in a pivotal year 3, and this is his schedule he gets drawn. Thank you, his AD. Thank you, our Big Ten officers and commissioners, for giving him that. I would also, like we talked about off air, I threw out Rutgers as, a potential, I think, sneaky tough schedule. I also wanted to bring them up because last year they were one of those teams that avoided, the Big Four last year that we talked about coming in the season and how there was a separation between those 4 and the rest of the conference, especially talent-wise and coaching. And then you brought up UCLA, and that's really, really interesting. It made me definitely double-check. They have a tough schedule. I think you're higher on Utah potentially than I am. And UNLV on the road, I think, is pretty sneaky. And also kudos to UCLA for doing that and going to Vegas there in the out of conference. But Yeah, I think this Wisconsin schedule, I mean, you're talking about not an easy, one of the better teams in the MAC historically with Miami, Ohio, and then Alabama. And you're out of conference as well. That one's on the road after they came up to Camp Randall and absolutely pushed you around for 4 quarters there. Yes, Maryland's in there as one of the teams that you want to see on your schedule in the Big Ten, but then you're looking at a lot of top half football teams there, top 60% or top, 40%, I guess is the correct vernacular there. You got at Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State, at Oregon, and that's just all back to back to back to back there. You do get a bye before you welcome Washington. Then you go on the road, to the last year's college football playoff participant in Kirk Cincinnati and Indiana, as well as finishing off with, one of the hottest teams, in this offseason in the Big Ten with Brett Bielema and Illinois, as well as going on the road, finishing off obviously with the Axe against your rival Minnesota. It's brutal. It is brutal out there for our Badger fans, up in Wisconsin there.
Now, we have to see how the season plays out. There's a lot of new faces in terms of like quarterbacks in the Big Ten. But I'm looking at that stretch from Iowa to Illinois. And you might be playing against 6 of the top 7 or 8 quarterbacks in the league. If you really want to break it down, I'm sure there'll be arguments for other there'll be arguments for other quarterbacks, right? And other whatever people's rankings differ. We have no idea what it's going to look like till the season happens, but that's a tough stretch of just quarterbacks that you have to go against. Not to mention the hype that Illinois is getting. Damon Williams over at Washington is getting a lot of looks. Fernando Mendoza at Indiana. What are we talking about? And then Minnesota is a place that the last 4 or so years, Christopher, you'd say it's kind of been split 50-50 there, but you got to go on the road. And then Drake Lindsey, who's a first-year starter, will have had 11 games to figure it out.
Exactly.
So, and Minnesota is still adjusting to a lot of stuff. They got a lot of players that they're missing from that last season. Corey Heatherman's going to Miami to be at the DC there, so lots of moving parts for sure. But by that point, Wisconsin might be absolutely decimated in terms of just injuries, which kind of plagued them a little bit at times these last couple of years, and just the sheer grit and toughness and heavyweights that you're playing on the schedule. Like it's going to be a grind if you're a Wisconsin fan. And look, last year was the first time you didn't make a bowl game in 22, 23 years, whatever the number was. You might want to get comfortable with the idea that you might not make it again to a bowl game.
The line, the win total line is 5.5, right? So Vegas says you're right there. I'm making a bowl game, but there is big time juice to the under, -170. So not a lot of value there if you're taking the under, which we'll see what happens there when we do talk about our future show back over in August. But yeah, it's brutal. And you're also talking about what makes this so hard in the Big Ten is it's a huge conference and there's a lot of parity. There's not a lot of parity in terms of scheduling parity. There's you have big gaps between recruiting resources, coaching, talent acquisition, all that kind of stuff there from your Purdue's and even Rutgers, Minnesota's, Northwestern, those kind of schools in terms of resource wise. And then you have your top dogs. And this schedule, you're playing 5 teams, including Alabama, right? That continuously every year expect their teams and programs to be competing for playoff spots, right? To be among the 12 best teams in college football. You have to play 5 of them. And then you're also throwing in, that's not including Iowa, who's been extremely successful the last decade and a half there, Illinois, Indiana, who just went on a run last year, as well as Minnesota. So it is brutal for our Badger fans. But hey, I mean, if anyone could do it, it's Billy Edwards, right?
Going over to the ACC, team that we talked about having one of the easiest schedules in college football last year, now has been on the receiving end in 2025 of one of the toughest schedules in college football relative to the members of their conference. We think, CD and I, that Syracuse has the toughest schedule in the ACC.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about all the things that contribute to a tough schedule out of conference wise, and then also brutal in conference.
It's there. I mean, Tennessee and SMU, Tennessee and Notre Dame are two of your out of conference heavyweights. Sure, you supplement that with Colgate and UConn, whatever. All right, Tennessee, that's a road game or a neutral site game. Neutral site in Atlanta, yeah, it's going to be flooded with orange, but not Syracuse orange. All right, it's going to be a different kind of orange there. Notre Dame game, you're going to South Bend. That's brutal. And then you play all of the best teams in the ACC, teams that you do not want to see. You don't want to see Clemson. You don't want to see Miami. You don't want to see SMU. You don't want to see Georgia Tech. The only team that you maybe missed was Louisville, right? Maybe. So you got a tough schedule relative to the other members of your conference. And I didn't really have a tough time looking at any other teams. I had mentioned Florida State might be a pretty tough one. You had mentioned Boston College, which I agree with. That's a pretty darn tough schedule, too, if you look at it. But Syracuse is far and away the toughest ACC schedule that you're going to see this year.
Yeah, after winning, 9-10 games after the bowl game, right? Fran Brown did in year one at Syracuse. We talked about how important it was in year one to take advantage of that schedule because not every year you're going to be gifted that. And this year, with the rotation of not getting Notre Dame in your schedule, as well as out of conference wise playing Tennessee, yeah, your win total is sitting at 5.5, and it's juiced to the under. And you do not have, it's not looking likely that you're going to make a bowl game, especially where we're sitting now. Obviously, a lot can change. Obviously, we're sitting here in June, just pointing fingers here, circling games. A lot can happen there. But you talked about it too. Also, and just your 5 toughest games on the schedule, meaning how hard is it to make a bowl game? Your 5 toughest games are all either on the road or neutral site, right? 6, I guess I would throw 6 in there with Tennessee, right? At Clemson, at SMU, at Georgia Tech, at Miami, at Notre Dame. That is putting you probably at 6 losses as we sit right here in June, right? If you're just circling wins and losses on their schedule and how hard it's going to be able to make up to get to a bowl game, you have to go perfect against Boston College, against North Carolina, against Pitt and Duke. And those teams aren't poorly coached. We don't think. We'll see how Bill Belichick does in year one. But Manny Diaz did an incredible job last year with Duke. Pat Narduzzi is a guy that we've kind of learned to trust with Pitt. Obviously, maybe talent-wise on paper, they don't have it every year, but who knows? And then obviously Boston College with Bill O'Brien and what they can do offensively will be interesting in year 2. It's tough for Syracuse. It is tough. Like you said, we talked about a couple of their teams. It wasn't too long of a conversation. It was more about just giving those teams
maybe who
is
number 2, right?
Yeah, exactly. And check out this, check out what they're doing in the out of conference. Like a Clemson going to LSU and South Carolina as well, but they don't have to play themselves. And obviously, with Boston College and yeah, it's not the same. And this is awful. Poor Syracuse there. But you know what? That's part of it. You're not going to have winners every year. And if you're a program like Syracuse, there are times you can just build up to a high level team, a double-digit win team, a team that can compete and potentially be a contender for a playoff year. This would not be one that I would be wasting big time money for 1-year rental players in the portal. And you kind of saw that, and they let Pena walk, right? At the wide receiver because they weren't going to meet his massive demands potentially for this season because those funds could be spent better elsewhere. It's tough roster building. It's hard. As a fan, obviously you want to be super competitive every season, but sometimes it's just I'm looking at it right now and I'm getting nervous for Syracuse.
Yeah, you're replacing your entire skill position on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, you're missing receivers, you're missing Rondé Gadsden, you're missing LaQuinn Allen, Kyle McCord got Heisman votes. I mean, he was very good for them. And, is Steve Angeli going to come in a limited amount of time? Because remember, he's a late spring transfer. Going to come in a limited amount of time and start lighting it up? I don't know. But remember, Louisville, when Jeff Brom came into the ACC, that was a layup schedule. We talked about that going into the season. We both were on the over for Louisville. It was a very nice, easy schedule. We were maybe there's a long shot here that Louisville can win the ACC, and they got to that game. And then the next season, they had one of the tougher schedules in the ACC. But you know what? They still managed to win 7, 8 games, whatever it was, maybe 9 games. But because they found a nice spot in the run game. Tyler Shuck ended up hitting as a quarterback. They were definitely significantly more talented than the Syracuse team is heading into 2025. But there may be some light there at the end of the tunnel. Like you don't know what these ACC teams are going to look like, and down the stretch, a lot of your winnable games are at the end of the season. You don't know what North Carolina's quarterback situation is going to be by then. You don't know what Boston College's quarterback situation is going to be by then. So hopefully they snag those wins against Utah and Colgate, and then just find a way to get 4 wins somewhere in that ACC schedule. That's a gauntlet. In the Big 12, this was kind of a debate, finding what the toughest schedule was. When I looked at Baylor, all right, the thing that turned me off of Baylor was that they played all of their toughest games at home. All right, that's a huge schedule dynamic in favor of them. I think that the quality of opponent on their schedule in terms of the in-conference, they play the top 3 teams in terms of Vegas odds in the Big 12, and then they also draw Auburn and SMU. I also thought Oklahoma State was a pretty tough schedule because you don't get to play yourself, right? And then you get Oregon, Kansas State, Texas Tech, Baylor, Iowa State, right? But you do get some of the other bottom-of-the-barrel schools. But my number 2 and your number 1, so we'll make it our number 1, is TCU. CD, why do you feel like TCU is the toughest schedule in the Big 12?
I mean, first of all, you start off with a couple of really tough out-of-conference games, comparatively, right? It's no layups. Obviously, you at North Carolina, that Chapel Hill will be rocking. Remember, it is Monday night, prime time, Bill Belichick week 1. Do you remember how rocking it was in Boulder for Deion, right? This is going to be a similar atmosphere I would expect for at North Carolina. And then a couple weeks later, you have to play SMU. And by the way, I hate the idea of a week 2 bye. That is awful. That is awful. That means you have a stretch after you play Abilene Christian where you get SMU out of conference, right? Obviously, not Dallas, Fort Worth. It's right there. A nice little recruiting rivalry. That's kind of fun to see. And then at Arizona State, Colorado, at Kansas State, Baylor, at West Virginia to finish that brutal 6-game stretch there for you. And then you get a bye, and then it doesn't get too much easier there. You get Iowa State there, a competitive team in the Big 12 for sure. At BYU, very tough place to play. At Houston, who we expect to be better, we think, this year, as well as Cincinnati at home. Who knows what they can be with Scott Satterfield. I think it's brutal. I think it is absolutely brutal. We'll see what they can do. I would expect, which by the way, TCU is one of those teams that you do not want to see in their schedule. So if you are Baylor, if you are Kansas State, Arizona State, Iowa State, some of those teams at the top there, these are going to be marquee games throughout the Big 12, especially with how even a lot of these teams are, especially at the top. Like it's going to be hard to tell week in and week out, especially as we sit here in June. How those games are actually going to shake out. But if you ask me, this is absolutely very, very tough for TCU.
Yeah, I'm with you for a reason. But it's just funny, though, because in the Big 12, there's not a ton of parity in terms of schedule making.
No.
Which makes this conference really exciting, right? That's not to say that the Big 10, right, isn't exciting. It's obviously very exciting football, but you are very much in tune with maybe the 3 or 4 teams that can possibly make it to the Big 10 championship or win it, In the Big 12, I mean, I just rattled off several schools that have similarly tough schedules, and if you just go through it, sure, there's an easiest one, but remember we even talked about it when we covered the easiest schedules in college football when we're talking about schedules like Houston's, right? They're still kind of tough, They're still kind of tough. It's really just all relative to your conference. So just because we say that TCU's schedule is the toughest in the Big 12, that doesn't mean that they can't necessarily find a way to win this thing in the Big 12. They got the quarterback to do it. They got some talent there for sure. They got a coach that's been there before. It'll be an interesting year for TCU. I think kind of a keystone year, if you ask me, for sure, in the future of the Big 12.
without a doubt. I want to make one point about that Baylor schedule. I'm glad you brought that up, especially with all their a lot of their very tough games being at home, which makes it on the surface easier. But in terms of at the end of the day, what the record is going to be, that's a slippery slope. We saw that last year. We talked about Texas A&M, having a lot of their easier games at home. And if you don't win all those games, you get caught up at home, and then you still have to go on the road, especially in the Big 12, when the talent gap is not there week in and week out, where you can't just roll out of bed on the road and get a win against some of the quote unquote lesser teams in the Big 12. It's a slippery slope without a doubt. So Baylor will be a team we're keeping our eye out on, especially Saturday, October 18th, when they do play TCU in Fort Worth there, not too far away from Waco. Yeah, it's super interesting. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think having North Carolina and SMU on their schedule. SMU, by the way, credit to them for playing a couple of those Texas schools in the Big 12 with Baylor, and TCU. I love that for them, out there, even though they're in the ACC, potentially not geographically, over on the Atlantic coast, but they're still keeping some of those roots home, some of those recruiting rivalries, some of that kind of stuff intact with, playing TCU and Baylor.
Yeah, Baylor, to the Texas A&M point, A&M was plus 1,900 to win the SEC before the season. That was one of my long shot bets for sure. They were a game away from making it to that game, because you won a tough game against LSU at home. You won a game against what, for the most part, people thought was a really good Missouri team. Maybe they showed some flaws later on in the season, but, you're looking at Baylor, what is it, plus 750 to win the Big 12 over there, and I don't think that's super crazy. I got them when it was at plus 800. I think plus 750 isn't that crazy. I think if you're going to go take something in the Big 12, you got to have something greater than plus 700 odds, right? How are you supposed to find value in Kansas State plus 550? You think, I don't know. That's just me. Maybe that's just me. Heading over to the American, I had 4 teams that I wanted to talk about. I looked at Charlotte's schedule. I thought that was tough. You had mentioned Tulane. They were on my list as well. UTSA also has a pretty tough schedule as well. I'm talking, of course, relative to the rest of their peers in the American. The scheduling disparity, I think, in the American is massive. North Texas's schedule is one of the easier schedules in college football, in my opinion. And then you go to a team like UCF, who has to play who we think is the toughest schedule in the American, and we'll love our commenters to let us know what they think is the toughest schedule in the American. Boise State, Florida, and Miami in your out of conference. And then you're going to play Memphis, UTSA, and Navy, who are easily top half teams. And then I think they also might play North Texas in there. They're probably a top half team in the American as well. So sure, you don't draw Army, you don't draw Tulane, but that's a tough schedule. That's a tough schedule. I'm sorry. I'll say it.
It really is. You talked about that too with the parity in the ACC and the AAC, not necessarily being there. But we do think the bottom half of that conference is going to get better. Maybe we'll see how drastic it is in year one with all those coaching changes. But I have a feeling a couple of those guys that we're pretty high on will fit. You also have Florida Atlantic, Zach Gitley guy. You're super high on me as well. Charlotte with Tim Albin, a couple of those bottom feeders, from last year. Rice runs a really unique offense. That won't be super easy, especially when you're banged up at the end of the season from having to play Boise State, Florida, and Miami back to back to back as it sits there, in this conference. So yeah, it's definitely something I would not be looking forward to if I was Alex Golesh there with USF, especially being a team in a program with resources and geography that wants to compete for the American Conference Championships, which means you're competing for a playoff spot there, in which this schedule, it gives you a chance to do that. If you do go out and beat Boise State, that will give you a massive edge to do that. If you are comparing resumes at the end of the year with a team like Boise State or a team in the Mountain West that's competing for that, if you have a head-to-head win there, that would be massive. And if you are somewhat competitive with Florida and Miami, and then you're going to have chances in your conference to make a mark and to obviously, put your best foot forward, put some good tape on film, and obviously bolster your resume with teams like you said, with Memphis and Navy, North Texas, all that good stuff there. But yeah, this is a tough one without a doubt. I mean, I thought about Tulane. You brought up Charlotte as well as having tough out of conference schedules, along with playing some of the tougher teams like Memphis. In the conference Army as well, UTSA, ECU, some of those teams that finished in the top half of last year's conference. But at the end of the day, I do think I'll agree with you there with USF and having a real tough schedule. And other than South Carolina State and maybe UAB, probably UAB with an interim coach. No, I kid. Those are a couple gimmies, but
you're kidding. I'm not.
No, but other than that, like it's a real tough schedule, and it won't be easy to win any of those games that you have on that schedule.
Yeah, I think we should also be careful though. It sounds like we're talking in absolutes, like, oh, this schedule is super tough, this schedule is super easy. On paper, I think the American could be one of those conferences where we see the bottom of the floor significantly rise. And we've talked about this several times, and you mentioned it kind of briefly there in your talk there. I mean, if you look at Vegas odds, the bottom 5 teams in terms of Vegas odds all have new coaches. Temple, plus 20,000 with Casey Keeler. Charlotte, plus 15,000 with Tim Alvin. Florida Atlantic, we talked about Zach Killey. We're both high on him, obviously. Rice, Scott Abel, Tulsa, Trey Lamb. I mean, those are 5 schools with brand new coaches that are supposedly, quote unquote, at the bottom, that have huge transfer portal overhauls, that have completely different philosophies than their previous regimes, stuff that's, in Abel's case at Rice, like stuff that most of this conference has never seen before, So it sounds like we're talking in absolutes, and sure, we're confident that, this USF schedule is the toughest in the American. North Texas is super easy, but there could definitely be a scenario where some of these teams rise and some of these teams fall, just based on the massive coaching changes. 6, almost half of your conference has coaching changes. So it'll be a really interesting year in the American, if you ask me, which we said earlier that there likely is this parity that we're talking about schedule-wise within the American, but I just get this little thing in the back of my mind that, like, there might be some crazy stuff that happens here. But even with all that stuff, if you looking at the out-of-conference, I mean, it's clear that USF is the toughest schedule in the American. The Sun Belt. It's been my favorite conference to watch, actually, the last couple of years. It really has been. I mean, like, weeks 6 through 14, you have no idea who's going to be competing for the Sun Belt. Like, every week, like, someone's in it. 5 teams all have the same odds to win the conference championship. It is week after week. Every game matters so much in this conference, which is why scheduling matters, right? The toughest schedule, in our opinion, and CD and I had some discussion about this for sure. We ended up leaning in favor of Troy. This was more of a CD play than my play, but CD, why do you think that Troy is the toughest schedule in the Sun Belt?
Well, one, you start with an out-of-conference schedule with, obviously, Nicholls. Say, like, that's, whatever. You're playing a division below. That's different. But you get at Clemson, which I love that you're hosting Memphis, so kudos to Memphis for doing that. But at Clemson, Memphis, at Buffalo, a Buffalo team that's not an easy out. I don't think at all. You see that, you see a MAC team, whatever. Yeah, it'll be fine. But you got to travel all the way up there. I know it'll be nice weather, so that's not too much of a concern there, going up to New York there. But they're a very well-coached football team. They're going to give you a lot of problems. You're going to lose the special teams battle. No doubt about that against Pete Lembo. So that's tough, right? That's 3 real tough out-of-conference games, as well as, in my opinion, you're playing in the tougher division, and which we love about our Fun Belt, the Sun Belt. We love, at least I do, that they have divisions still. An East and a West division.
Let's go.
I believe that the West is a deeper and a better division than the East. I thought we saw that play out last year too. The East had Marshall and JMU, being pretty good, as well as Georgia Southern, being up there.
Yeah.
But in the West, you're going to have Louisiana coming back again, Texas State, Arkansas State, South Alabama, teams I expect to be among that top half, almost top quarter of the Sun Belt, as well as Southern Miss getting a coaching upgrade there. You expect them to be better than 0-8 in conference. You expect Troy, who obviously, you're not going to play yourselves, but you expect Troy to be a little bit better in year 2 there. And then UL Monroe, who surprised a lot of people. Maybe they won't win 5 games again, but obviously they found something there with Brian Vincent. So that's what I see with this schedule. Troy's crossover schedule. Remember that term, crossover, in terms of who you're playing on the other division is it's Old Dominion and Georgia State, who are probably pretty favorable. And I think that's what led to this discussion with, potentially going with Georgia State instead of Troy. But I just look at this up and down, and it's pretty tough.
Yeah, I guess my argument for Georgia State was their out of conference is pretty tough, right? And then also James Madison and South Alabama, I expect to be 2 of the best teams in the Sun Belt, period. But then the out of conference, Georgia State has, Ole Miss, they got Memphis, and they got Vanderbilt. So that's what was leaning me in that direction. And, Marshall with the coaching change may not be as good as much as we freaking love our guy over there, legend Tony Gibson. Coastal Carolina is going to be an interesting one with new quarterback looks there. Georgia Southern, I don't know. And they don't get to play themselves. So I think a lot of people are anticipating Georgia State being one of, if not the worst teams in the Sun Belt. The schedule to me screams 3 to 4 wins for Georgia State, but you never know what can happen in the Sun Belt, right? And even those winnable games like Old Dominion, Coastal Carolina, Georgia Southern, Troy, they're on the road, So you get your tougher games at home, but in Georgia State's case, that may not play in their favor, like it would play in favor for other schools. So that's why I thought that, but I do think that Troy's schedule, I was very okay with putting Troy as the redshirt sophomores' toughest Sun Belt schedule out there because, like you said, Buffalo, what are they, the 3rd odds-on favorite to win the MAC after Ohio and Toledo? Toledo talent-wise, boom. Ohio returning a lot of people, plus Brian Smith, continuity is great. Yeah, this Troy schedule it's pretty brutal. Like you said, I agree with you that division's probably better as well. Like you said, the crossover games, not to be redundant, it's very good for Troy that they got those guys because,
could have been bad.
Jared Parker could definitely use some help here in year 2 because last season, I think, as Troy fans know, and Sun Belt fans know, that's not normally up to the standard of what Troy's done. I mean, ever since that they've been in that Sun Belt, they have been a force to reckon with. And as long as John Summerall was there, it was an absolute powerhouse. So hopefully they get back to those winning ways, but it won't be without a couple of lumps in those first 4 weeks for sure. And then it's going to be a tough division. So look at Troy, but that's I guess that's why we have Troy as our toughest Sun Belt schedule in 2025. In the Mountain West, there were some discussions here. Nevada was brought up as potentially the toughest schedule in the Mountain West. We ultimately settled on Utah State. I think this is a brutal schedule. And you also had mentioned Boise State, and we can talk about that in a little bit. They do have a tough schedule as well. But I want to highlight Utah State's here. You play the top 4 teams in the Mountain West, all right, in terms of odds-on favorites in the Vegas odds. In Boise State, Fresno State, San Jose State, and UNLV, right? So boom. Right there, your conference is already as tough as it almost is going to get. And then when you're out of conference, playing A&M and Vanderbilt, that's some of the tougher out of conference that you're going to see in the Mountain West. Maybe not the toughest, but it's one of the tougher ones. So if you have the toughest Mountain West schedule, probably, and one of, if not the most tough, I guess, in the aggregate out of conference schedules as well, relative to some of those other Mountain West teams, it's going to get interesting. So, pivotal year for a first-year coach, it's a pivotal year, obviously. But Bronco Mendenhall had immediate success at New Mexico, And I think the schedule also played into his favor a little bit. Also stole a couple of nice wins there. Stole one against Washington State, which is awesome. But he's not going to have his offensive coordinator. He's not going to have Devin Dampier. It's going to look a little bit different. Bronco Mendenhall known for that 3-3-5, Rocky Long-esque defense that's been really good from over the years. He hit on some offensive coaching and players last year that led him to win some games. Is that going to happen this year? I don't know. All right, so this schedule is, in my opinion, it's the toughest schedule in the Mountain West.
Yeah, I think what ultimately let me cave there was, well, one, Boise State doesn't have to play Boise State, right? And two, and looking at how tough that in conference is, I looked at that end of November, and it's at UNLV, it's at Fresno State and Boise State there. Not to mention, too, in the middle of your schedule after a bye week, great, you're going to Hawaii. You got to travel back and then play San Jose State, one of the better coach teams as well in the Mountain West. Yeah, it's brutal for Bronco Mendenhall year one. And I don't know if you mentioned, but UTEP too, being a team in the outer conference that's definitely sneaky in terms of it won't help you. I don't think a lot week one if you do win that game in terms of what people give you credit for. But one, that's, we think, a pretty darn good coach down there with Scotty Waldron. And we'll see if they make some noise in the CUSA with new quarterback Malachi Nelson as well. So it's something to watch. Yeah, I'm with you. Poor Bronco Mendenhall. Obviously, a lot of things working against him, in year one here with Utah State. But I would also have thrown in New Mexico. I thought about them just because I see Michigan and UCLA as well as UNLV and Boise in that schedule. And I was like, maybe plus Colorado State and San Jose State too. But I just do think that overall depth, what you were saying with Utah State, pushes them over the edge. Plus Vanderbilt too. Like, why not? Diego Pavia has done a lot of damage against teams like this in his past, and it's obviously going to be an uphill battle, for Utah State. Plus, you're just going to be beat up. I don't like that, the dynamics of, UTEP, right? Probably playing a somewhat close game against them. You're obviously going up against, the biggest humans you'll see all year with Texas A&M. And you got to turn around and prep for Air Force and that offense. And so that's obviously not like a great week to do that, because how productive are you going to be on Sunday and Monday to get you ready for that game against Air Force? So it's something to monitor for sure. And with the dynamics of the schedule, yeah, I'm with you on Mountain West. The toughest schedule does belong to our Aggies of Utah State.
In the MAC, honestly, it did not take me very long at all. And look, forgive me, I'll be honest, I didn't look at every single MAC team, but when I came across the Ohio Bobcats schedule, I said to myself, there is no way in hell that there is a tougher MAC schedule than what Ohio has to bring over there to Athens. It is brutal. And by the way, they are going to be good. Like, this is a good team. So we'll see how many of these, if any, of these big-time out-of-conference games they can steal. But look, and I'm sure in the comment section, though, there's other tough schedules in the MAC. Would love to hear those in the comment section. But we'll talk about this one. Rutgers, West Virginia, Ohio State in your out-of-conference. Okay, sure. You don't pull Toledo in your in-conference. All right? But you don't get Kent State, which is by far the worst team in the MAC. And it's not even close, right? Yeah, this is going to be tough. A tough schedule. In terms of high upside wins, if I was to pick today, I'm probably taking Ohio to win the MAC. I'm probably not going to take it up, plus 280 or whatever it is. Maybe not enough value for me right there, but it's a pretty darn good team, but with a pretty darn tough schedule. Wouldn't you say, Mr. Ohio Bobcats alum?
Hopeful
student?
Yeah, but we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. It is brutal. I just think those first 3 weeks, it's going to take a toll on this team. We'll see how well they are playing once Maction hits the road there in November after playing a lot of physical games, a lot of physical opponents. And by the way, one of your gifts in terms of West Virginia coming to play you in Athens there in the out-of-conference, you could throw a rock from Athens and hit West Virginia. Like, it's not that far away. Morgantown is just about 2.5 hours, 150 miles away from Athens. So there will be plenty of Mountaineers that are there looking for cheaper tickets than in Morgantown
Yeah.
and wanting to go to a college football game and watch their team sport. Like, that's a real thing that I think will happen here. Obviously, I'll be rooting for the OU and our Bobcats here, but yeah, you talked about, I'm not going to repeat all what you said with the Power 4 schools, playing some of the tougher teams in the MAC, and also not getting, some of those teams you want to see, in the MAC there. It will be really interesting. The only good news is you do get a lot of time from like that tough schedule in terms of Rutgers, West Virginia, Ohio State. You do have about 3 or 4 weeks until you start getting into the meat and potatoes of your MAC schedule. You just kind of got to survive and get through Bowling Green there. What's that, week 5? So it'll be interesting. At least you're at home, which is nice for that game. But then you got to regroup and reset. And for a first-year head coach who's probably already drinking through a water hose or drinking through a fire hose there, it doesn't get easy week 1, week 2, week 3 to get your team to resettle, a team that has had a lot of success, by the way, a lot of success the past couple seasons. All those players on that team, who've been a part of it, they're not used to losing, and you might start 0-3, and that will be an uneasy feeling for the Bobcats there, and we'll see how they can respond throughout the season. But yeah, this is without a doubt, I think, the toughest. I would have brought in UMass, but again, they don't play Toledo either, and they just have a couple tough out of conference games with Iowa and Missouri, and they host Temple, which is fun for Casey Keeler in year 1. And Joe H. being the UMass coach. But yeah, I think Ohio's the pretty correct choice here.
The last conference we'll talk about, Conference USA. This one was an argument for CD and I for sure, finding like what the toughest schedule is here in this conference. Liberty doesn't have to play themselves, right? And they're out of conference as a joke. So it was very easy to pick them for the easiest. But in terms of the toughest, a lot of these schools go play big Power 5, Power 4 schools. And they're all playing very similar teams in their conference because there's only 11 teams in the Conference USA, I believe. Hope that number's right. Maybe 12 now because they added 2. But I think I'm right with 11. But maybe 13. Gosh, we should know that. But anyways, the point is, the Bearcats, and they're out of conference, okay? This is where it stands out to me. Texas, UNLV, Oregon State are all pretty decent opponents right there, especially Texas on the high end. And then to boot, you got to go to Hawaii. I mean, brutal, right? Brutal. Not the travel to Hawaii is what makes Hawaii tough, right? We know that they're not necessarily an incredibly tough opponent when it comes to just the level of talent and skill that team has, but pretty well coached, traveling thousands of miles away. It's literally the furthest possible place you can travel to in college football. And then in your in-conference, you don't draw Kennesaw State, which is a team you want to draw, and then you don't draw Missouri State either, which, like Ryan Beard over there, just not sure how his team's going to fare in Division One. So if you can draw those teams that are first-year Division One teams, it's pretty nice. Now, you don't get Liberty on your schedule, which is the drawback in terms of calling this the toughest schedule in the CUSA. Not drawing Liberty definitely takes it down a notch, and there's a school that you added there in an argument that definitely has Liberty as a school that they drew. But, I mean, you mentioned Missouri State being one of the tougher ones. I mean, what are you comparing between Missouri State's schedule and Sam Houston's schedule in 2025?
Well, you have 3 tough out-of-conference games, right, relatively to this USA, right? So Sam Houston, you talked about having Texas. They've got UNLV and Hawaii, right, as well as Oregon State. So, like, that's a lot there. Missouri State, they get UT Martin, right? So that's, like, their easier game. But, again, a team that's, they can lose that game for sure. And then it's at USC, at Marshall, and then they host SMU, which is just awesome. But yeah, that's what I was kind of looking at. And then you also get Western Kentucky and Liberty in conference, as well as FIU with Willie Simmons there, a team I'll be watching very keenly, over down there in Miami. But yeah, I think obviously, with the toughest game being Texas and how, like, yeah, that's brutal. And then that Sam Houston gets, as well as just the depth. You're probably going to go 0-4 out of conference. You'll probably start the season 0-4 with that Western Kentucky game on the road, week 0. That's a big time game, by the way, like a huge game for this USA race right there in mid-August, which is fantastic. That we're counting down the days, a couple months away from then. So that's what's tough for Sam Houston. Obviously, breaking in a new coach, a lot of different new faces there along your offensive defense. But yeah, it eases up, I think, your back half of the schedule. So that's one thing where if you do start 0-4, if you're Sam Houston, don't panic the alarm. You still have a lot of ways to go for Phil Longo to get things on track there. But also similarly, I guess, kind of to the American, or really to some other, I guess, other conferences, like outside of the teams you don't want to play, like it's a lot of similar teams. So like it's not like, oh, like one team gets Jack State, one team gets La Tech, or one team gets UTEP, one team gets Mid Tennessee, whatever it may be. It's not like the end of the world between the nitty gritty there. So it's kind of hard to distinguish with this conference. But yeah, overall, I just think the depth and the seeing Texas, at Hawaii, at Western Kentucky, UNLV, and Oregon State, like those 5 tough games are tougher than I think the 5 toughest games of Missouri State. So that's where I'll be at for Sam Houston. I'm good with that.
Thank you all for tuning in. That's going to be it. Toughest schedules in college football. Sorry, Notre Dame, join the conference. Sorry, Washington State, Oregon State, join the conference. Don't know what to tell you. I guess they aren't in the conference.
Washington State and Oregon
They
State.
are in a conference.
They
tried.
Right, they tried.
They didn't deserve that, actually, at all. I love Washington State and Oregon State. I love Trent Bray. I love Jimmy Rogers. In fact, I was one of the only people in national media, college football, that was higher on Jake Dicker, buying stock at its lowest. We were there.
We were.
Sorry, guys. I really need to apologize for that. But anyways, if you made it this far, 1, sorry. 2, maybe consider liking. If you like the content, like the video, potentially subscribe. If you want to see more stuff like this, we're going to have more content coming for you guys this summer. I mean, I'm still getting through my research packets it's going to be a gauntlet when we go through all those previews, those preseason previews for every single team in college football, but we're Power 4 team in college football, but it's going to be worth it. It's going to be awesome. So, CD, anything for us on the way out?
No, like you said, like, subscribe. Also share out to your fellow college football friends. Obviously, those, big time names, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, ACC, but also we talked about all the other conferences too in the G5. We hope we did our best giving them justice for what they deserve and all that kind of good stuff. So let them know, share to your friends, of your fans, different teams, and all that kind of good stuff. And hope you enjoyed.
We'll see y'all in the next one.